Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, UWI Investor, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, crossing new frontiers to conquer today's challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine.
What kept me moving forward towards the fastest computation that I executed on the 4th of July 1989 and executed across my ensemble of 65,536 tightly coupled processors was a back-of-the-envelope theoretical calculation that I did in the 1970s. From that back-of-the-envelope calculation, I theoretically discovered that in theory, 2 to the power 16 processors that could only calculate 47,303 floating point arithmetical operations per second per processor can be integrated across a small internet that is a new global network of 65,536 tightly coupled commodity off-the-shelf processors, with each processor operating its own operating system, and with each processor having its own dedicated memory that shared nothing with each other. That is, I discovered a priori that my new internet will become my new supercomputer that will be faster than the old vector processing supercomputer that was the industry's state-of-the-art technology and that computes less than 3.1 billion calculations per second. In the 1980s, I was the lone full-time programmer of the only massively parallel processing supercomputer that was an ensemble of 65,536 processors. I was a lone wolf research supercomputer scientist that was not a member of a 400-person supercomputer research team. Such research teams were funded by the United States government. Such research teams were funded to bring the best brains from United States national laboratories and use that intellectual capital to bear on a grand challenge problem or the toughest problem in computational physics. Such problems were described as grand challenges because they were perceived to be otherwise unsolvable. What made the news headlines was that I, Philip Emeagwali, had invented how to harness those computing units, namely a new internet that is a new global network of 65,536 processors. I figured out how to harness those ensemble of processors to process simultaneously and to process together, and to do so as one cohesive whole unit, or to process in parallel, or to process as one integrated superprocessor that is a never-before-seen supercomputer that is the precursor to the modern supercomputer that I expect to become the computer of tomorrow. That is, in the 1970s and 80s, my technological quest was for how to massively parallel process across a new internet, and how to massively parallel process and do so at a time theorists were theorizing their way through parallel processing. A theory is an idea. A theory is not a discovery. A theory is an idea that is not positively true. In the 1970s and 80s, parallel processing was ridiculed, mocked, and rejected. Parallel processing was scorned as a beautiful theory that lacked experimental confirmation. It's not possible to experimentally discover the fastest speeds in supercomputing and discover that fastest speed by merely and only theorizing about how to achieve the fastest speeds via the massively parallel processing supercomputer hopeful. In my experimental confirmation of the new fastest speed in supercomputing that occurred on the 4th of July 1989 and occurred in Los Alamos, New Mexico, United States, I confirmed that the massively parallel processing supercomputer can be programmed to increase productivity and to reduce the time to solution of the toughest problems in extreme scale computational physics, and to reduce that time to solution from 65,536 days or 180 years on only one processor to just one day across a new internet, that is a new global network of 65,536 commodity off-the-shelf processors that were identical and that were equal distances apart. After my invention of the massively parallel processing supercomputer, the technological progress that followed in the subsequent 3 decades was a series of cleanups and refinements and rediscoveries. 3 decades later, my invention of the massively parallel processing supercomputer enabled China to copy that massively parallel processing supercomputer and to use the technology to massively reduce their time to solution and reduce it from 30,000 years or 10,649,600 days of time to solution on only one processor to just one day across 10,649,600 commodity off-the-shelf processors. That was how China, that did not invent the massively parallel processing supercomputer, massively parallel processed its way to the world's fastest supercomputers. To enter into the unknown world of the massively parallel processing supercomputer required that I begin sequential processing supercomputing and begin it on June 20, 1974 in Corvallis, Oregon, United States. I began supercomputing when I was only 19 years old. I began supercomputing at 1800 Southwest Campus Way, Corvallis, Oregon, United States. When I began supercomputing, I was new in the United States, having arrived on March 24, 1974, after receiving a scholarship letter that was dated September 10, 1973. Then and now, and excluding athletes, only a dozen or so Nigerian teenagers were invited each year to study in the United States and offered a 4-year academic scholarship to do so. As an aside, many of the famous computer pioneers of today were also teenagers in 1973 and were born at about the same time of August 23, 1954, that I was born. I was born in Akure, in the heart of Yoruba land, in the western region of the British West African colony of Nigeria. I was born in Yoruba land to Igbo parents who grew up in Onitsha, Igbo land of southeastern Nigeria and lived in Kano, Hausa land in the late 1940s. My father was educated for the 6 years inclusive from 1942 to 47 at Christ King College, Onitsha, in the southeastern region of Nigeria. My father left Kano at age 29 to come to Akure in 1950 to work as a nurse in the small hospital in Akure. In the early 1950s, my father's salary of £5 a month supported a dozen family members, both in Akure and Onitsha, Nigeria. I was born in a boys' quarter that was at the junction of Eke Emerson Street and Oba Adesida Road, Akure, Nigeria. I was born on Monday under the sign of Vigo. The US president on the day I was born was Dwight D. Eisenhower, a Republican. Since Nigeria was then a British colony, Queen Elizabeth II was the head of state of Nigeria. The Governor General of Nigeria on the day that I was born, Sir John Macpherson, represented Queen Elizabeth. When I was born, there were 5 adults sharing a tiny room and a tiny parlor, namely my father, Nnemeka James Emeagwali, my mother, Inyamma Agatha Emeagwali, my aunt, Nkemdelim Grace Azuokwu, my cousin, Vincent Emeagwali, and my cousin, Charles Emeagwali. Aunt Nkemdelim came from Onitsha 3 days after I was born and on August 26, 1954. Aunt Nkemdelim came for 3 months in Omogo. Steve Jobs was 19 years old when I came to Oregon and lived an hour's drive from Corvallis, Oregon, and lived in Portland, Oregon. Bill Gates was 19 years old then and lived 3 hours drive from Corvallis, Oregon, and lived in the border state of Washington, United States. The difference between the other research physicists, research mathematicians, and research computer scientists, and myself, Philip Emeagwali, that was a massively parallel processing supercomputer scientist, was that those researchers were plowing the frontier of computational physics, or the frontier of modern calculus, or the frontier of abstract algebra, or the frontier of the vector processing supercomputer. Most research supercomputer scientists of the 1970s and 80s were plowing frontiers of knowledge that had already been plowed. As a massively parallel processing supercomputer scientist of the 1970s and 80s, I did not believe in replowing the frontier of the sequential of knowledge of the sequential processing supercomputer, or in replowing the frontier of knowledge of the vector processing supercomputer that had already been plowed. Replowing the frontiers of scientific knowledge that had already been plowed makes as little difference as searching for new crude oil and natural gas in the Oloibiri oil field of Bayelsa State of Nigeria. The Oloibiri oil field was the first oil field discovered in West Africa. The Oloibiri oil field dried up after 20 years of oil exploration and was abandoned back in 1978. Comparing the new massively parallel processing supercomputer technology to the old vector processing supercomputer technology was like constructing a brand new highway from Cairo, Egypt, North Africa, through Lagos, Nigeria, West Africa, that is 95 hours of non-stop driving of 6,500 kilometers, and constructing that brand new highway to Johannesburg, South Africa, that is 98 hours of non-stop driving of nearly 7,000 kilometers from Lagos, Nigeria, and comparing that super highway construction project to the superficial repaving of the existing half-an-hour drive 45-kilometer highway between my ancestral hometown of Onitsha, Nigeria, and Awka, Nigeria. That is the reason the massively parallel processing supercomputer cost the budget of a small nation. Since the first sequential processing supercomputer was invented in 1946, the price performance of the supercomputer dropped continuously and exponentially. If that pace of technological progress upholds, the supercomputer of today will become the computer of tomorrow. On the 4th of July 1989, I, Philip Emeagwali, entered into the history book. I was profiled in books such as the one that was titled History of the Internet. I am the subject of school reports because I experimentally discovered a new way of looking at the modern computer. The June 20, 1990 issue of the Wall Street Journal recorded that I experimentally discovered a new paradigm called massively parallel processing supercomputer. That new paradigm in supercomputing changed how we compute and changed how we solve the toughest problems in modern calculus and extreme scale computational physics. That new paradigm changed how we solve the system of partial differential equations that governs initial boundary value problems of modern mathematics, such as general circulation modeling to foresee otherwise unforeseeable climate changes. That new paradigm changed how we solve the toughest problems in extreme scale computational physics and changed how we solve those problems in parallel and changed how we solve those problems at the fastest supercomputer speeds. I was asked, what makes a discovery or an invention newsworthy? I answered that, first and foremost, the new knowledge that is embodied within the scientific discovery or within the technological invention must compete with new celebrity gossips and new hot-button political and religious issues. For those reasons, a newsworthy contribution to human knowledge must be bold and strange, or be a new paradigm, such as the invention of the massively parallel processing supercomputer that solves the toughest problems in extreme scale computational physics and solves them in an unorthodox manner that challenges expectations. Discovering a new paradigm in supercomputing prompts the leaders of thought in the world of computers to ask for the discoverer's telephone number. That's how and why Steve Jobs got my telephone number and contacted me in about June 1990. Back in the 1970s and 80s, parallel processing was ridiculed, mocked, and rejected as a beautiful theory that lacked experimental confirmation. Today, we take it for granted that the massively parallel processing supercomputer harnesses the total computing power of up to 10,649,600 commodity off-the-shelf processors that are identical. But to Steve Jobs, my invention of the parallel processing supercomputer was like science fiction becoming non-fiction.
Insightful and brilliant lecture.